Welcome to the Retirement Lifestyle Show. I'm your co-host, Roshan Loungani. This week, I've got Adrian Nicholson with me. Eric's decided to take a vacation. No, he's at a conference this week. So, Adrian, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Definitely miss Eric being here, but I'm sure we're going to have a great episode without him. And I'm sure can't wait to listen to what we have to offer today.
Yeah, well, he'll definitely pay attention to make sure we don't make fun of him or say anything he wouldn't like. So, we'll be see you next week, Eric, when you're back. Adrian, why don't you start us off? Share the topic for today.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So, the Washington Post recently published an article that categorized some common questions people had by age group. And we just want to go over some of these questions for each age group today because we think it'd be helpful for our listeners and viewers to see what they may be faced with as time goes on in their lives. And before we start the episode, I just first want to address some major criticism about this podcast episode. That age is just the number. It does not limit your ability to reach certain financial milestones within your own time frame. And yes, I agree with that. And that's just a great thing to point out. But ultimately, what we're trying to do today is just highlight and just help our listeners and viewer understand what they potentially could be faced with in their financial lives so they're better prepared in order to achieve their goals.
Yeah, and the article does talk about it based on age, but I think sometimes life stage might be a better way to look at it just because people reach different milestones at different points in their lives.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, just life stage. And a lot of these, based on age groups, they do have a lot of overlapping. So we definitely understand that. But there are just some really good questions in there that we're just excited to talk about and go over today that might be something you're thinking about today that you need help answering. We also would love to have a conversation. Our information's in the show notes. You can always feel free to reach out to us if you want to dive deeper into some of the responses we have to these questions. So we're always available. So I'm really looking forward to today's episode. How about you, Roshan?
As am I. I'm looking forward to going through these different lists and just sharing thoughts on some of the things that were mentioned. And Michelle Singletary is a great writer for the Washington Post. So let's start us off. What's the first one you've got?
So the first age group is the 20-year-olds. And the first question that I pulled from this list is how much should you put into a retirement account? And this is a really good place to start out. Well, like we mentioned before, this is going to be different for every individual because everybody's situation is different. And just to start off with this one, just a good place to start is if you're working right now and you have a 401k plan, is there a match available? Because that's something that you should consider as well. Also, how much do you pay in taxes? Are you able to get a really good tax deduction? Are you able to set up an automatic saving? And I think the real question here for how much should you put in a retirement account, I think the real question is how much can you afford to put into a retirement account? I think that's a really good starting point to begin with this question.
Yeah, agreed. I think when you so first you mentioned what's the match? That's free money. I think you should really try to take advantage of it. Second, if you're looking at how much you can set aside or save towards retirement in general, a general rule is to do about 20% if you can, right? So if you can save 20%, usually things will work out for you. You've also got, depending on your income and your career, you've also got the Roth IRA as an option available to you. And if you're expecting at some point to go over the threshold, that opportunity goes away. So I know at the younger ages, it's harder to save towards it's harder to save more because you're not making as much as you typically will in at later points in your life. But thinking through where to save, taking advantage of things that may not be available to you later. But as you mentioned, the match is really a good place to start.
Mhm. And timing. That's your biggest friend when you're in your 20s because you're able to experience the wild up and downs of the markets. You have time on your side when it comes to investing. And typically, when you're investing in these retirement accounts, we like to set it and forget it and not having to be forced to withdraw from it because there are also are some withdrawal penalties and tax consequences that go into it. So the timing aspect of this is really huge because just overall over time, it really works in your favor if you're able to just put money aside and have it grow without you touching it. Is just so impactful at this stage in your life.
Yeah, you've got the longest time frame that you'll have for retirement in your 20s, unless you're able to save in even earlier years in your teens and before.
Yep, exactly. So we can move on to the next common question that people have in their 20s. And this one is called, is it time to get a credit card? And this is an important one too if you're trying to build credit, if you're looking to rent a home, buy a home, purchase a car. So this is something that can be very valuable, but it also could be a double-edged sword too. If you have a credit card, you run up the balance and you have a really high interest rate on that as well, that could really eat away at you over time. So there's a lot of things to really consider when you're going back and forth on whether you should get a credit card or not.
What's funny is this is under the in your 20s category. And I remember in college, the credit card companies would have salespeople all over. You apply for a credit card, you get a free t-shirt, a free hat, sometimes a candy bar. So I wonder if a lot of times people in their 20s already have a credit card. But one of the general things that I mentioned earlier about savings, a good target was at least 20%. With credit cards, another one of pay that balance off every month. You don't want to carry interest. It makes sense to build your credit as well if you have not done so. I have worked with clients where they've got plenty of money saved and they don't have a big enough credit history, meaning they didn't have multiple lines of credit. So even though they have plenty of money, their financial situation is doing well, money saved for retirement, money in the bank. When they're applying then for a mortgage, it becomes an issue. So building your credit is important, but you want to make sure you pay off those liabilities. These credit card companies, they're in business and making billions in profits because they collect interest if you aren't paying that off every month. Credit card interest tends to be higher than other forms of interest out there. So you probably want to build your credit, but make sure you do it in a disciplined way.
Exactly. And like I said, just know what the interest rate is because that is one of the most important factors when it comes to paying that off as well and really impacting your overall situation. So I thought that was a good one as well. So I really like where we're headed with this podcast. So let's
Yeah.
move on to the age 30-year-old group as well.
Hold on,
So
before
the
you jump on, I want to add a couple things for 20s. And once again, this is broken down by age, but I'll say people starting out. So if you're someone who's gone to school, you've gone to med school and now you're actually in your 30s and starting to build this thing. It's the life stage that matters, not the age. But a couple other things I'd point out is one, building cash is a good idea. So you want to make sure you have a cash reserve set up. Usually we want anywhere from 2 to 6 months worth of expenses. The range is based on what your amount is and what your comfort level is. If your expenses are 2,000 a month, so two times that would be 4,000. That may not quite be enough. On the flip side, if your expenses are 20,000 a month, two times that is 40,000. That may be enough. So your personal situation is important here. Another thing that I'm sure you're going to touch on in the 30s age, but I think is worth thinking about earlier is just that first home purchase. So as you want to build that cash and start to get yourself in a position to purchase a property. Now, everyone's situation is different. I'm sure there are people out there that would say, I don't think purchasing a property is a good idea. It really depends on the individual situation. But for most, I think it's a good idea to make that property purchase. So, Adrian, now I'll let you continue on with the 30s.
we can just skip the 30s and go straight to the 40s because the two questions I had pulled from the article in the 30s was, I'm making decent money right now. How much should I save? And the next one is, am I ready to be a homeowner? And you just touched on both of those. So that's why I always like it when you jump in, Roshan, because you sometimes just read right off of my computer screen and just predict it. So it's very impressive.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much.
So I guess I'll just touch on those two since you already took care of them and just add what my opinion is on them is if you're starting to save, like Roshan said, just create that emergency savings. That's extremely important as well. Just having cash available for whatever this may come up, that's extremely helpful. And this is also just driven by your goals and cash flow as well when it comes to investing or whatever it may be that you're trying to achieve in the future. just putting money aside is always really helpful. So you don't have to maybe take from certain buckets that you set aside for certain milestones or goals that you have in the future. And then the one,
Agreed.
are you ready to be a homeowner? That's just could be a whole podcast episode on what you really need to consider, what type of mortgage you take on, maintenance costs, location. That's always a big thing to consider when you're looking at purchasing a home. And it's one of the biggest purchases you'll ever make in your life as well. So that's why we're talking about it right now and saying there can be a whole episode on it, because there's a lot that you need to consider when you're making this such a big purchase as well. Also, another thing you need to consider, the interest rate environment as well if you're taking on a mortgage. And can you afford that monthly mortgage payment with interest as well? Those are all things that you really need to consider. Is there anything else you want to add on, or do you want to move to the 40-year-olds, Roshan?
No, general rule when you're looking for that home purchase is you want to make sure you've got 20% for the down payment plus 3% for closing costs. And these are the 20% down payment will help you avoid mortgage insurance. There are other ways and other programs out there, but if we're talking speaking in generalities, that's where you want to start. The 3% for closing costs, that's an average that may be local to the DC metro area. So maybe a little higher or a little lower where you are. But if you're in your 30s and you're thinking about, or 20s, whatever the age is, thinking about buying a home and you don't really know that much about it, those are I think, your two starting targets to have about 23% of the purchase price for that property.
Yeah, and my last point on this too is if you're looking at purchasing a home, what are your other liabilities as well, especially at this stage in your life? We just talked about before, do you have a lot of credit card debt? Do you have student loan debt? What are your other liabilities as well? That's something that you really need to look at your plan and run their numbers. Maybe you can take on this home purchase and add another liability because you're just making a lot of income, you have a lot of money set aside. It could work for you, but if not, it could just be very stressful at tacking on another mortgage as well to that. So the planning aspect as
Yeah,
well is very beneficial when it comes to this.
yeah, it definitely is.
So we'll move on to the next question we have for the 40-year-old group. This one is, when is the right time to talk to my aging parents about their finances? Roshan, do you want to tackle this or do you want me to start off?
Oh, please start us off. I'd love to hear where they said and then share some information.
So for this one, it just seems like the better time you can start it, it would be just be the present as soon as possible, because there's a lot of things that get baked into this as well. Maybe you have this conversation, it just doesn't go well the first time. So just giving yourself a lot of time and flexibility to really work out having this conversation with your parents or your loved ones, whoever it may be that are starting to get older and they need help with whatever it may be, like healthcare costs or finances, whatever it is, just having that conversation so you have more time to plan is always something that's very beneficial when it comes to having these sometimes very emotional conversations.
Yeah, and I know every family dynamic is different. So for some people, they talk about finances openly. Some people they never do. And in some households, you've got one person running the finances. Some it's done as a group, as a couple, a group of family, and others. One person may not know anything going on. But I would say that the sooner you have this conversation, the better. I have clients where you've got the one extreme where children know they're going to have to subsidize their parents' retirement. And in some cases, it's for the majority of their retirement, maybe uh, all of it really. And then I've got other scenarios where the parents are subsidizing the children's lifestyle, by subsidizing, sometimes it means they're literally giving them money for stuff. In other cases, for estate planning, they're just gifting them money that person's then investing. So I think having that conversation the earlier the better, to understand where they stand, where that parent situation is. And it's not only just purely financial from just a money perspective. To me, this is also a health conversation, because long-term care costs are high. They're getting more expensive every year. So knowing as a child, if you're going to have to support your parents both financially and from what the healthcare risk is an important conversation to have, because it can affect your finances, right? In some cases, I'll have people that say, well, if they need care and they don't have it, I'll pay whatever I can. In other cases, there'll be households that say, no, I don't want you to contribute at all. So I think understanding what each generation's wishes are and what they want to do is important, and planning for that is very important.
Hmm. Having that idea right away, the conversation might be fully drawn out, but just having an idea where things are headed just can give you, like I said in the beginning, that flexibility, that time to really plan ahead and see what your options are. Because as you get older, as time goes on, that window just becomes more narrow and you might have less options. So starting that off early just to see what general direction you are can open up a lot of options for you. So I think that's just the point we're really driving home here.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question that people in their 40s have is, what's the best way to save for college? And just going back to the last thing we talked about, when is the best time to talk to your aging parents about your finances? It's the same thing here. Starting as early as possible is always very beneficial when it comes to this as well. So what's the best way to save for college? A common one people probably come across a lot is the 529 plan. This gives you the ability and the opportunity for tax-free investment growth, a tax deduction. It's also a way for you to lock in future costs of in-state colleges as well. So this gives you a lot of degree of flexibility when it comes to education costs. But one of the concepts that we talked about earlier, the earlier you can start, the much better it is, especially when it comes to investment performance within these accounts as well. We want to also address the fact that there are penalties when you withdraw these from this account and you're not using it for educational expenses as well. So there are things that you need to consider before you contribute to these accounts.
Yeah, and a new interesting wrinkle on this, we talked about this on our episode where we reviewed the Secure Act 2.0, is that now 529 money can roll into a Roth IRA. So if
Mm-hmm.
you don't need it for education and you want to give it to your children, in theory, they could have a lifetime's worth of tax-free growth, because you could start it when the child's born and then eventually roll it over into a Roth IRA, and they can have that be retirement money, where in order to contribute to a Roth IRA, you typically need earned income. And most, 1-year-olds or newborns aren't working and earning any income. So you can start earlier than you ever could. So I think that's a great added benefit to the 529.
Mm-hmm. And what you need to consider too, there is a time frame for this conversion. You at least need to have the account open for 15 years. So it's not something you just can create right away, just kind of create a loophole around it. So it has to be open for 15 years. So that's something that you need to consider as well. And also, maybe if you don't want to go the 529 route because you're not really sure if the person that's going to be going to university or not will be using this, so you don't want to be affected by that penalty, you can just create a regular investment account. And so you have the flexibility to use it on whatever they end up doing in their life.
Yeah, but what's next for the 40s? Or are we on to the 50s now?
We're going to be moving on to the 50s. The next one is it time to get a will? What's your take on this one, Roshan?
If you're looking at it in your 50s and you have children, you're probably a little late. So yes, I think I'd move that up to the maybe 40s or maybe 30s is my thought and opinion on this, just because the first thing you've got to consider, the milestone for me when I looked into this was having my son, and we needed to figure out, well, if my wife and I both pass away, who's going to take care of him? Right. So I think looking into it in your 50s, and I would expand that to estate planning in general, is
Mm-hmm.
probably a good thing, but maybe a little bit earlier to look into this than the
Mm-hmm.
50s.
Yep. And it just gives you a greater control of your assets if something were to happen as well. Just having that ability to plan ahead and just make those decisions before something happens is just really important. So that's just one that the earlier you can get this done, the better. The next question is, and this is going to be a probably really long one that we can spend an episode on, is can I afford to retire? And there is just so much that gets baked into this, especially since we are planners. There's a lot of stuff you got to consider. Where's your income going to come from in retirement? There's Social Security. You might have all these different accounts that are taxed in different ways you have to look at. It's going to be also driven by your expense level and lifestyle. And this is something that we look at on an annual basis as well, just to see if you're still on track for retirement and your goals as well. So this is definitely a very big planning question that we've discussed in multiple episodes as well, where you just have to look at your overall situation and plan out the different scenarios that can impact your life as well that goes into this.
Yeah. So talking about retirement too, as you get closer, I think life becomes clearer when you're making those decisions. We talked about planning for your retirement in your 20s and 30s. So we're by no means saying wait till your 50s. But in your 50s, you're a little more settled. Even in your 40s, you're getting more settled, but you've still got college expenses. So retirement feels further off. With college in mind, though, we discuss with clients, and should have mentioned this on the 40 section with the 529 that you mentioned, Adrian, but uh, what you want to provide for your children for college does vary, and for a variety of reasons. And what I mean by that, I have clients that will say they want to fully fund their children's education. Some want to fund it partially. Some don't want to fund it at all. And their experience for college really plays a major part in that decision. And it's not like they always want to pass on the same thing. So I have clients that say, well, mine was fully paid for. I didn't appreciate it as much. And then I'll have other clients that say, well, I had to work really hard to pay for my school and I had loans and I don't want my children to deal with that. So sometimes it's that you want the same experience. People say mine was paid for, so I want my kids to pay for. And others will say, well, I had to work for mine, so I want my kids to work for mine. And some might be the opposite. But making that decision, what you want to provide for college, if anything at all, is first an important one. How that applies to the 50s is oftentimes you then reach your 50s, college has been planned or paid for, or you're past that, and now you can focus on your retirement. And if you had children and they're out of the house, and your expenses now really reflect you individually or as a couple more than they do a family, including the children, retirement starts to be a little clearer. So figuring out what you want to do, what you can afford. Oftentimes, if you've been prioritizing family and children and education first, you can now prioritize yourself to understand, well, where do you want to live? What do you want to do in retirement? So the picture becomes clearer. As that picture becomes clearer to you, you've now got a more realistic goal to save for. Whereas in your 20s and 30s, it's more like save as much as you can for retirement. Oftentimes I'll meet with younger clients and I'll say, you want to be ahead of your goal in this age for a couple reasons. One, your expenses are going to go up. So if you're just on track for your goal in your 20s and 30s, you're probably a little bit behind. And when I say expenses go up, I'm speaking to you and your personal lifestyle related expenses. In addition to that, family related expenses can go up. Having children, buying a house, and childcare costs, on and on through college. So once you get into your 50s, you're often on the other side of that, and you're now planning more. Your picture is clearer that you can plan for.
The numbers are clear as you get older, and that's why we say just run the numbers, because you can run them in your 30s and it looks great, you're on track, but a lot can happen between your 30s to your 50s to your 60s and so on. So you could be running those numbers and they can be changing a lot as you're younger, but as you get older, maybe the outcome and the scenarios are becoming more in focus and not changing as much anymore. That's why we say the ongoing annual planning is just so important here, because you're really just fine tuning everything. And like Roshan says, you have a clearer picture. You're not going to be faced with all these different things that come up maybe in the earlier stages of your life as well. So this is why running the numbers are so important at this point, because again, the picture, like Roshan said, is more in focus here. So that was some great points that you brought up, Roshan. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I feel like I wasn't ahead on this one though, so now I feel like I'm behind since I was able to call the 30s.
Exactly. So we'll move on to the next group, the 60-year-olds. And a common question that was a big one here in the article was, when should you take Social Security? And there's a lot of factors as well to consider when you take Social Security, starting with what are your financial needs? What's your health situation, your taxes, your working status? This is all stuff that you really need to factor in when you want to decide what's the most optimal way to take your Social Security. Also, your marital status as well can play into this as well. Delaying it, we all know, increases the amount. So there's a lot of stuff that gets really baked in here. It's not as simple as take it right away or delay at the very end. It could be for some people, but whatever your overall situation is, can maybe make a big impact and really keep you in the bucket on, am I on track for retirement or am I not? This adjustment right here on when you take Social Security can be a pivotal factor in your financial life.
Yeah, that's a very important question. We have really three different pieces of software that look at this, right? So one of them, we look at your overall financial plan. Our goal for that one is to make sure you have enough in assets till age 100. Typically, we will look at personal life expectancy scenarios as well, but in general, we're looking to make sure you have enough till age 100. So how does the component of Social Security help get you there? And that'll tell you whether you should take it earlier, full retirement age, or delay it till age 70. The second piece of software, we look at it with a life expectancy ranging between 75 and 95. And that one really looks at how can you get the most out of the system. So what's different is, one is how can you optimize your financial plan? The other is how can I get the most out of Social Security? And then the final one looks at all your retirement assets, Roth assets, uh, so qualified accounts, Roth IRA, qualified accounts is in 401ks, TSP, traditional IRAs, money that went in pre-tax that'll come out and be taxable. Roth IRA or Roth 401k, where the money went in after tax and will come out tax free. And then finally, regular investment accounts or regular brokerage accounts. And we'll look at all of those. In addition to that, Social Security, we'll look at the taxability, what way optimizes how much you get out of those accounts, which accounts do you draw from, when do you take Social Security, and also what ways minimize your tax liability. Those aren't always the same. Minimizing taxes doesn't always mean you get the most out. So we look at all of those different scenarios, those three different pieces of software, to figure out when you want to take Social Security. I would tell you to make that decision with a lot of time, research, and analysis, because you don't want to make the wrong one. So that is a very important question. And Adrian, I touched on some of the numbers in the financials, but you mentioned, I believe you mentioned marital history, age, life expectancy, as a few other areas that are very important when you analyze
working
Social Security.
status, taxes, or the other ones. So
yeah,
that's a big one. And again, if you have more questions with that, feel free to please reach out to us. We'll be happy to run through the software that we have to see what's the optimal way for you to take your Social Security. So the next one for the 60-year-old group is, should I pay off my mortgage? And there was something interesting that came up when I was researching this question, and that is the mortgage interest deduction overrated? What's your kind of take on that stance?
I look at it by the individual is the very first thing I'd say. And when we look at it by the individual, it's not just numbers, it's also personal preference. Some people just don't want a mortgage in retirement. And so I have clients who've got pension income. So the argument to them typically is, Adrian, what you just said, you get a tax deduction, so have the mortgage because you get a tax deduction, and they've got this fixed income stream, meaning they can easily pay the monthly mortgage payment, but they just don't want they don't want to have a mortgage in retirement. So we will run the numbers and look at, well, what are they leaving on the table? How does it impact their overall financial plan? But I'd say that the first piece that we look at is affordability. So the question is, can you afford to pay off your mortgage? The whole concept of having a mortgage, and investing what you can, it's based on a spread. If the mortgage, and using similar to current rates, if you've got a 6% mortgage and you're returning 7% on your investments, let's say, well, you're getting a 1% greater rate of return. That's not including the tax deduction on the mortgage. But just to simplify it, do you need that extra 1% a year to make sure you have enough money for retirement? If the answer to that question is a yes, then you don't really have the luxury, so to speak, of paying off the mortgage. If the answer to that question is no, then okay, you've got the options. You want to pay off the mortgage or not. So the general convention or thought of yes, have a mortgage, it's just because you can probably earn more on your money in the long term than you can than the interest you're going to pay, especially after the tax deduction that you'll get.
Yeah, and that's what you touch on because conventional wisdom says no, like especially if the market's doing really well and you got a good low mortgage rate, conventional wisdom would say no. And also what you touched on the
And
planning
Adrian,
aspect. Yeah.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, when you're saying conventional wisdom says no, you're saying it says do not pay off the mortgage.
Yes, correct.
Correct. Okay. Excellent.
And then the other part that you touched on as well for the planning piece is, are you depleting your savings also just to pay off this mortgage as well? Because that could put you in a bind as well if that's your emergency savings as well that you're using to pay off as well. It's just going to have you scrambling and pulling from different areas as well. So the planning piece of it is extremely important as well when it comes to deciding whether or not to pay off your mortgage.
Yes, it is.
So the next group, age 70, I thought this was a question I really haven't heard in a while and I thought was interesting is, I am a saver. How do I switch to spending? And I think where we're going to go with this one is it's going to be the plan. The plan, let that be your guide and navigate you. But I definitely can see some people at this stage in their life where they're just been saving so much, just putting money aside. They've just been really just been saving as much as they possibly can to stay on track for retirement. And once they get to this point, they really don't know how to, let's just say, go on the other side and become a spender.
Yeah, I've seen clients struggle with this a lot, and when you say this, one client comes to mind in particular where I'm constantly telling her that she can spend more. She is yeah, like a depression era baby, and so she's always been this saver. So what I think you've got to find is you've got to give yourself one, permission to spend, and two, figure out what you feel comfortable spending on. So this one client that comes to mind as we talk about this, well, I have got she'll splurge a little bit on herself, nowhere near what she could spend. She's in the Buffett snowball scenario where she's got enough in her asset growth is greater than her spend rate. So every year she's got more in assets, but I've got her to splurge a little bit on herself. You get a nicer classic ticket when she travels, but very minor, nothing huge. The area where I've gotten real breakthrough with her spending is she really does love giving to charity. So she's now giving a lot to charity. She's still got the same problem of assets growing faster than liabilities, but she found that that's something she feels comfortable spending on. I've got another client that comes to mind in this scenario where, in her case, she feels comfortable spending on her kids and grandkids. So her splurging has been, I'm going to take the entire family on a trip once a year. So she'll spend a lot on that, but excluding that trip, she's really still not spending money on herself. But these are things that she's, quote unquote, giving themselves permission to spend on. So it's a work in progress. You won't get there overnight because you have this savings because who you are as a person. You're probably a saver, but typically people will find things and it'll take time, but they'll find things they'll allow themselves to spend on.
And it might not apply to this client scenario that you just gave, but I guess one of the things that might scare people into spending more when they're just savers is just the fear of rising healthcare costs. I believe that's got to be one of the most expensive things that people have to address and spend money on in retirement. So that's where I addressed earlier. This is where the plan can really come into place here, where you can run what's going to be the most you expect to spend in healthcare costs. And the number, like I said, the plan will be your guide on what you can and cannot afford or what your situation may be in retirement. So just maybe running scenarios in this situation can really help see what your maximum spending limit is, or can give you some sort of comfort and less stress when you really see it all laid out in front of you as well. Can be very beneficial from the this mindset aspect.
Yeah, and plan using the plan as your guide, I think is the way to go. That client I mentioned about spending more, we sort of she does not have any long-term care insurance, so we said, all right, we split her money into three buckets, in our mind in the plan. We didn't actually separate it out, but we said you need X amount to meet your retirement needs. You need Y amount, which would be if you had extended healthcare costs, and then Z is what you could, in theory, because she likes to donate, give away tomorrow and still be okay. So you can figure out there are real numbers that can help you figure that all out for yourself, and you would then be in a position to potentially feel more comfortable spending.
Hmm. Exactly. So that was a good discussion right there on that, on people that are savers and then you switch to spending. The next one for the 70-year-olds is, what do you need to know about RMDs? So this is an extremely important one as well. And there have been changes to this due to the Secure Act 2.0 that's been passed the law, which increased the RMDs to age 73 in 2023, which is now, and then the age will be bumped up to 75 in 2033. And this is where you're being forced to withdraw from your qualified accounts, whether this is an IRA, your old 401k, whatever it may be, you're forced to take out an amount every year. So this is something else that planning can be extremely important to before you get to this age as well, or if you're already out there, just having to deal with this as well because you're going to be paying taxes on this is really important, especially when it comes to planning your retirement.
Yep, the age has changed. Also, in January of 2022, the uniform lifetime RMD tables that the IRS puts out has changed. What that means is you actually need to take out a little bit less now than you had to before. So uh, that will be calculated in. We've got programs and software that calculates that, and it's just worth the noting that did go down a little bit, not huge, but it went down a little bit. And as Adrian mentioned, the age you need to take it at has extended. So the effort, people are living longer, so it's just a way to make sure that your assets last longer as well.
And just understanding the tax consequences as well, because if you're somebody that's pulling from, let's just say, just different accounts in retirement as well, and you're expecting to take out a lot in income this year, and you're also hit with this RMD, you have to really factor in the tax consequences before this arrives as well if you're trying to get a head start on this.
Yeah, and actually, Adrian, you mentioned this for the 70s. I'd argue you want to look at this earlier, literally 50s and 60s, just because what we're doing with clients now is, I mentioned all those multiple pieces of software. We're looking at whether it makes sense to do conversions, Roth IRA conversions. So converting a traditional IRA to a Roth, and we're looking at that for a couple reasons. One of them is tax rates are expected to go up in 2026. The other reason we'll look at it as well is looking at your future required minimum distributions. So if you've got to take out more money than you need once you reach your required minimum distributions, whether it's 72, 73, or 75, if you've got to take out more than you need, well, should we take some of it out now at a lower tax rate and convert it? Roth IRAs are not subject to minimum distributions. So if you every year when you calculate this, your distribution, it's the December 31st balance of your traditional IRA that you're required to take out. So by converting it to a Roth, you're lowering that balance, which means you'd have to take out less. So it's uh, worth looking at in your 70s for sure, because you've got to take it out, but earlier to plan for it to just minimize your potential tax bill and maximize your asset level.
Yep, tax efficiency is huge. The way you can plan ahead to really just minimize that as much as possible is just a win-win situation in this case. So I just really enjoy that as well. Is there anything you want to touch on in the 70s category before we move on to the last one?
Now, aside from the RMDs, and this is also should I think should have been at an earlier age, uh, but healthcare planning, specifically looking at this should have been I think in the 50s, looking at long-term care and preparing yourself. Do you anticipate having the assets where you can self-insure? Do you think you'll need long-term care insurance? Will you not have enough in assets, which makes that a higher potential need? So I'd say that healthcare planning is something that I think should be in there at an earlier age than just the I don't think it was mentioned, but more in the 50s.
Yep, I definitely agree on that one, Roshan. Good point.
So
So the last one is the 80s, and there was just one common one that people pulled from this for the questions is how to protect your financial legacy. And there's a lot that goes into this one as well. We mentioned it before, just having the right estate plan put into place, understanding what your future healthcare costs may be and what type of health issues may impact you. Just surrounding yourself with the right people, whether it's just a support group, whether it's people to help you manage certain things that you're maybe not able to take care of when you reach this stage in your life as well. Just is a lot of planning that goes into this as well. But again, like we said earlier, with this, just having the conversation with some people before you get to this stage and just really planning ahead can really help protect everything that you build up at this stage in your life.
that's a good one. It reminds me of earlier in this where they had said the planning for a will, and I think the distinction they're making here is you might need more advanced estate planning work when you're planning for your legacy or protecting your assets. The healthcare piece comes into play also. The other thing I'll mention in this age group, and not to get too morbid at all on this, but a lot of people now are planning out uh, literally their funeral, whether it's getting a plot for your burial ground, whether it's here's what I want in the funeral to the point where I've had some clients or I've known people where they had parents pass away and they said, I want to be in this outfit. I want, this buried with me and so on. The more planning you do around that, the easier it makes for the survivors. So that's something that's worth thinking about also at that age, or even if you wanted to look into it earlier.
I mean, yeah, this definitely is a time for a lot of reflection. This is a very transitional period for some people as well, and you just want to make this as peaceful as possible and just take out all the stress and confusion that can be caused by all these tough questions sometimes. And just the more that is known for some people in this situation is just very beneficial in the long run. So there's definitely a lot to think about for this one as well.
Yeah, and the other thing that we talked about life stages earlier. You also have stages of retirement, right? So just going through that, let's just say with these questions, the retirement was at age 65. Well, you're probably at some higher spending years early, taking trips that you wanted to take for years. People often will put off, major home repairs and so on until they're done working, just so they have the time to deal with it. Maybe a move, and then you're really in your late 60s to 70s when things smooth out, and that's probably where you can start thinking about the legacy planning as well. So I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be in the 80s. It's likely when your retirement life has gone to more routine than from it being new and exciting with a lot of change. And that can, as I said, typically I've seen ranges on what it can take. The one that comes to mind is I think it says about 5 years.
Oh wow, that's it. That's definitely interesting. I mean, good
Yeah.
point. It is stages. It's not going to be. Sometimes you have it planned out, and maybe the first couple of years it goes exactly as planned, but then maybe things just change at this time in your life. So just understanding what is going to happen, what the future may hold, is really the main concept of today's episode. Like we say,
Yeah.
we've been using ages for these categories where people have these questions at all different points, but just understanding what could impact you in the future and what questions you may run into maybe now or maybe later on is just really important to just have that conversation, just to think about so you have that flexibility and you're overall prepared so you can help just move forward and achieve your goals or whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah. Great. Excellent. Adrian, I think that was the entire list of questions that you had pulled, correct?
Yeah, and like we mentioned before, if you wanted to dive deeper into these questions, just feel free to reach out to us. Our information is in the show notes. We'd be happy to just dive deeper and help you plan all this stuff out. If you're a new listener or a new viewer, whatever you can, just like, subscribe, tell your friends and family about the episode so other people who may have these questions could see that we're doing our best to lay it out and just be as detailed as possible, just to overall help out people's situation.
Yeah, and we will share the information for this article as well in our show notes. And we'll be back next week with another great episode. Thank you for listening. This has been the Retirement Lifestyle Show.